one side is a two-sided thing, and one side has the quiz on it. The other side just has some quotes that I.
And my phone isn't working for some reason.
I've got one extra if somebody needs one. David's read the book, so he'll give you his. I'll run you. I've got another copy here. This is the one that was my experimental one that I put in the
Wait, I don't need a
Here.
pen, I just need a pen. Pass it up.
You need a sheet, Barbara?
Yeah.
Are there enough? Everybody have one? Okay, so I'll go through the questions here. The first one, and one of the things I do in my class at Candler, because we're talking about the whole global context, especially of Christian mission in this class, but we often are just very ignorant about the rest of the world, and I would imagine that this group is probably more on top of things than a lot of people are. But the first question is, number one, in all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? 20%, 40%, 60%? No, just answer it on your sheet. We'll go through it. Two, where does the majority of the world population live? Low-income countries, middle-income countries, or high-income countries? Just answer the one you think, low, middle, or high. Number three, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has A, almost doubled, B, remained more or less the same, C, almost halved. Number four, what is the life expectancy of the world today? 50 years, B, 60 years, C, 70 years. Number five, there are 2 billion children in the world today, age 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100 according to the UN? 4 billion, 3 billion, or 2 billion? Six, the UN predicts that by 2100 the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? A, there will be more children below 15. B, there will be more adults 15 to 74. C, there will be more very old people 75 plus. Number seven, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? A, more than doubled. B, remained about the same. C, decreased to less than half. Okay, this question is a little tricky because each of these numbers represents a billion people. There are roughly 7 billion people in the world today, and which shows how they're distributed. A would be 1 billion in the Americas, that's North and South America and the Caribbean, all that area. 1 in Europe, and 1 billion in Africa, and 4 billion in Asia. You see how that, okay, so then B is 1 Americas, 1 Europe, 2 Africa, 3 Asian. C is 2 Americas, 1 Europe, 1 Africa, 3 Asia. Number 9, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? A, 20%, B, 50%, C, 80%.
That would be some, but not necessarily all.
Right. Any disease.
Well, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against, yeah, some disease. And I mean, obviously, there are only so many vaccinations that you give at 1 year old too, you know, so,
But have any.
yeah, any vaccination, they've received at least one vaccination. 10, worldwide 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? A, 9 years, B, 6 years, C, 3 years. In 1996, giant pandas, tigers, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered. How many of these three species are more critically endangered today? A, 2 of them, B, 1 of them, C, none of them. How many people in the world have some access to electricity? A, 20%, B, 50%, C, 80%. Global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will A, get warmer, B, remain the same, or C, get colder. Let's see, I'm going to have to come out of this because I have found I can't go directly. I've got a YouTube video, and I have to come out of my PowerPoint in order to show that.
Yeah.
So hold on just a minute and let me do that. I'm gonna have to come out of PowerPoint and show the video. Hans Rosling actually has published several books. He's done several TED Talks. He passed away actually before Factfulness was published in 2018. It was published with the help of his son Ulla and his daughter who worked with him on the book, and he deals with statistical information, factual information, but has a real gift for putting it into understandable and entertaining ways. And so he did a TED Talk about that is going to give you the answers to 3 of these questions, and then we'll go over all of them afterwards. Okay. That may be helpful, at least over here, because it's a lot better. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to ask you 3 multiple choice questions. Use this device to answer. The first question is, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disaster, how did that change during the last century? Did it more than double? Did it remain about the same in the world as a whole, or did it decrease to less than half? Please answer, A, B, or C. I see lots of answers. This is much faster than I do it at universities. They are so slow. They keep thinking. Oh, very, very good. And we go to the next question. So how long did women 30 years old in the world go to school? 7 years, 5 years, or 3 years? A, B, or C? Please answer.
This is actually a little different from what's on yours.
And
This
we go
was
to the next
filmed
question.
before the book
In
came
the
out.
last 20 years, how did the percentage of people in the world who live in extreme poverty change? Extreme poverty, not having enough food for the day. Did it almost double? Did it remain more or less the same, or did it half? A, B, or C? Now, answers. You see, death from natural disasters in the world. You can see it from this graph here, from 1900 to 2000. In 1900, there was about 500,000 people who died every year from natural disaster. Floods, earthquake, volcanic eruption, whatever, droughts. And And then, how did that change? We asked, Gapminder asked the public in Sweden. This is how they answered. The Swedish public answered like this. 50% thought it had doubled, 38% said it's more or less the same, 12% said it had halved. This is the best data from the disaster researchers. And it goes up and down, and it goes to the Second World War, and after that it starts to fall, and it keeps falling, and it's down to much less than half. The world has been much, much more capable as the decades go back to protect people from this, you know.
How many got that?
Only 12% of the Swedes know this. So I went to the zoo and I asked the chimps. The chimps doesn't watch the evening news. So the chimps, you know, they just choose by random. So the Swedes answer worse than random. Now, how did you do? That's you. You were beaten by the chimps. It was you. You were 3 times better than the Swedes, you know, but that's not enough. You shouldn't compare yourself to Swedes, you know. Higher ambitions in the world. Let's look at the next answer here. Women in school. Here you can see men went 8 years. How long did women go to school? Well, we asked the Swedes like this. And that gives you a hint, doesn't it? The right answer is probably the one where fewest Swedes pick, isn't it? Let's see. Here we come. Yes. Women have almost catched up. This is the US public. This is the US public. And this is you. Here you come. Well, congratulations, you're twice as good as the Swedes, but you don't do me. So, how come? I think it's like this, that everyone is aware of that there are countries and there are areas where girls have great difficulties. They are stopped when they go to school, you know, and it's disgusting. But in the majority of the world, where most people in the world live, most countries, girls today go to school as long as boys, more or less. That doesn't mean that gender equity is achieved, not at all. They still are confronted to terrible limitations. But schooling is there in the world today. Now, we miss the majority. When you answer according to the worst places, and there you are right, but you miss the majority. What about poverty? Well, it's very clear that poverty here was almost halved. And in US, when we asked the public, only 5% got it right.
Anybody here got it right?
And you?
Good.
You almost made it to the ship. There must be preconceived ideas, you know. And many in the rich countries, they think that, we can never end extreme poverty. Of course they think so, because they don't even know what has happened. The first thing to think about the future is to know about the present. These questions were a few of the first one in the pilot phase of the Ignorance Project in Gapminder Foundation that we run. It was started, this project, last year by my boss and also my son, Ola Rosling. His co-founder and director. And Ola told me we have to be more systematic when we fight devastating ignorance. So already the pilots revealed this, that so many in the public score worse than random. So we have to think about preconceived ideas. And one of the main preconceived ideas is about world income distribution. Look here, this is how it was 1975. It's a number of people on each income. From $1 a day. See, there was one hump here around $1 a day. And then there was one hump here somewhere between $10 and $100. The world was 2 groups. It was a camel world, like a camel with 2 humps. The poor one and the rich ones. And there were fewer in between. But look how this has changed. As I go forward, what has changed, the world population has grown, you know, and the humps start to merge. The lower hump merge with the upper hump. And the camel dies and we have a dromedary world. The percent in poverty has decreased. Still, it's appalling that so many remain in extreme poverty. We still have this group, almost 1 billion over there, but that can be ended now. The challenge we have now, is to get away from that, understand where the majority is. And that was very clearly shown in this question. We asked, what is the percentage of the world's 1-year-old children who have got those basic vaccines against measles and other things that we've had for many years? 20, 50 or 80%. Now, this is what the US public and the Swedish answer. And you see, look at the Swedish result, you know what the right answer is. Who is professor of global health in that country? Well, it's me. It's me. You see? It's very difficult. It's very difficult. However, Ola's approach to really measure what we know made headlines. And CNN published these results on their web, and they had the questions there, millions answered, and I think there was about 2,000 comments. And this was one of the comments, I bet no member of the media passed the test. So Ola told me, take these devices, you are invited to media conferences, give it to them and measure what the media know. And ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, the informal result from a conference with US media. And then lately from the European Union media. See, the problem is not that people don't read and listen to the media. The problem is that the media doesn't know themselves.
So, okay. So that's... Okay. How many of you felt like you were on the right track answering these questions? Well, the thing about it is, we're watching those news media people that are ignorant themselves, and so let me go over the questions here while I get myself back into the PowerPoint. Number one, in all low-income countries across the world, how many girls finish primary school? How many said 20%? How many said 40%? How many said 60%? 60% is the answer, C. And the second one here, well, no, you don't. What do you? Number two, where does the majority of the world's population live? A, low-income countries, B, middle-income countries, or C, high-income countries? The answer is B, middle-income countries. And so then 3, in the past 20 years, the percentage of the world's population living in extreme poverty has, that one, almost half. That was one he gave. Number 4, what is the life expectancy in the world today? How many of you said 50? How many said 60? How many said 70? It's 70. Number 5, there are 2 billion children in the world today, aged 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100, according to the UN? A, 4 billion, B, 3 billion, C, 2 billion. How many said A? How many said B? It's C. How many said C? Anybody get that one? You read the book. This book is in the library in Young Harris, by the way, so it's interesting. Number 6, the UN predicts that by 2100 the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? A, there'll be more children. That's not true, don't you? Because of the answer to the previous one. B, there'll be more adults, 15 to 74. C, there'll be more very old people. How many thought A before you? How many thought B? How many thought C? The answer is B. We're not beating the chimps, Bob. But we're beating the Swedes, all right. 7, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change? You know that one. It was more than half. What? Oh, yes, there are roughly 7 billion people in the world today, which shows how they are distributed according to billions. 1 billion Americans, 1 billion Europe, 1 billion Africa, 4 billion Asia. How many thought that? B, 1 billion Americans, 1 billion Europe, 2 billion Africa, 3 billion Asia. How many thought that? C, 2 billion Americas, 1 billion Europe, 1 billion Africa, 3 billion Asia. How many thought that? The right answer is A. There's so many people in Asia, we just don't, we just don't comprehend how many people are in Asia. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? It's 80%, we know that. Okay, worldwide 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school. It's actually improved since he gave the TED Talk. Now it's 9 years. So it's closing that gap, which is wonderful. 11 in 1996, giant pandas, tigers, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered. How many of these 3 species are more critically endangered today? A2, B1, C none. Which is the right answer? A? Who said A? Who said B? Who said C? It's C. Question 12. How many people in the world have some access to electricity? A, 20%. How many said that? B, 50%. Who said that? C, 80%. Who said 80? It's 80. So, I bet you get the next one. We'll see. Global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will A, get warmer. Who said get warmer? You're right. So he just put that in so people would figure it out. He didn't want to. Let me get down to where we are here. So, the thing about it is, we get our information from the news, and it's become more and more competitive. We are in a different age of information because it's so available. It's available from every part of the world, every hour of the day, every minute of the day, and it's constant. I remember during the Operation Desert Storm back in the early 90s, there was a friend of ours who thought he was having a heart attack, and they took him to the hospital and checked him out, and his heart was okay, but what he figured was he had gotten so addicted to watching the 24-hour coverage on CNN of the war that it had actually thrown his whole body off. Well, that was just CNN. Remember that year, Ted Turner was the Time Person of the Year because of the way he had used CNN. Well, since then, we've got all these other news networks, and they're competing with each other. And, if it bleeds, it leads, as they say. The more sensationalized it can be, the more likely it is to grab your attention. And so we don't hear about very much of these these things where progress is being made, where good things are happening. We just hear about, you know, the crisis this, crisis that. I mean, actually, you know, right now it's the coronavirus, and I was just reading something that said actually just the good old plain influenza is probably much more of a threat to us, and we're used to that, so we're not really paying attention. This cartoon, I don't know if you could read it. It says these people are watching the TV. It says, "Good evening, news masochist." But now with this constant barrage of information, I mean, you've got your phone that can send you alerts all the time. We can watch 24-hour coverage of all different kinds of things. There are things that happen in the world that we may not have ever known about or may not have known about until months later, but now we know about them instantly. And so it's just a different world that we live in, and humans weren't designed to care about everything in the world, to carry every burden in the world. You know, and sometimes we just have to feel like if I'm a caring person who's aware, I have to let my heart bleed for everything that's going on and we're not wired to be able to do that. And it's very difficult. There are all these causes and all these things that are going on that are vying for our attention, and it's very difficult. And we can really suffer overload from it, like my friend did, who ended up in the hospital. If we're not careful, we have to be sure that we are able to take care of ourselves. So I came across this quote recently, and I thought this was good. You know, we are just so distractible, and everybody's trying to grab that attention, and the way they grab it is not with something calming and not with the good news, but they can grab you more with the things that are negative than with the things that are positive. One of the books that I have read, Ryan Holiday is a young writer who has really tried to introduce Stoic philosophy to the world today, and this is I think his most recent book is called "Stillness is the Key," and he talks about this whole concept of apatheia from Seneca. You must be sure that you're at peace with yourself when no noise reaches you, when no word shakes you out of yourself, whether it be flattery or a threat or merely an empty sound buzzing around you with unmeaning sound. And that was quoting Seneca, the first century philosopher. And it's interesting that all different religious and philosophical translation or traditions have a word for this. And I'm putting the words up there, but I'm not going to try to say them. But you see, and Buddhist, and there's a Muslim word, a Hebrew word. You know, we've got from the Hindu tradition, Greek, Epicurean, and Christian. There's a word he translates as stillness, and stillness. I really there's a word that I like a little bit better than that, just for myself, which is serenity. Because to me, stillness just, you know, you kind of think you just got to stop and not move. But serenity is something that sort of, to me, encompasses more. But I think it's getting at the same concept. And I found this quote, which I thought was interesting. You will continue to suffer if you have an emotional reaction to everything that is said to you. True power is sitting back and observing everything with logic. True power is restraint. If words control you, that means everyone else can control you. Breathe and allow things to pass. And I think this sort of sums up a lot of what Ryan Holiday was saying in this, that, you know, don't don't get ruffled by everything that's happening. It's not too good. And this is one of the things, I have my own ways of meditating and finding mindfulness. And do y'all mind just going through a short mindfulness little exercise? Okay, well, I'll show you what I like to do. And I'm going to sit down for this because I like to sit. So just sit comfortably and close your eyes. If you've got something in your hands, you may want to put it down. And mindfulness, a lot of it is really involving the senses. So even with your eyes closed, you see things. So think about what you're seeing. And then think about what you're hearing. I sort of have a tinnitus that makes everything sound like cicadas in the background. So I just pretend I'm outside listening to cicadas in the woods. What do you taste? What do you smell? Now involve your sense of touch, which is so much more than what you feel with your fingertips. Feel the air against your exposed skin. Feel the clothes that are enfolding your body. Feel the weight of yourself sitting in the chair, your feet on the floor. Now take a deep breath, breathe it in, and breathe it out. Just feel your breath going in and out. One thing that I have learned to do that I've never seen anybody else talk about, but I like to feel my pulse and to actually become aware of the blood circulating through my body. So see if you can quiet yourself enough to just be conscious of that. Now think about all those functions that go on in your body that you don't even have to worry about at all. Your food is being digested now. There are glands that are pouring out different things. There are all these things that are acting, and you don't have to worry about them or think about them at all. They're just going on, and you just be grateful that your body carries on without your awareness. Take a deep breath and open your eyes and come back to awareness. Here we are. So anyway, sometimes it's just refreshing to do something very simple like that. But if I can still myself enough to feel the blood circulating through my body, were y'all able to do that, or am I just weird? Okay.
A little weird, but.
Okay, well, okay. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Okay. I really, for me, that and then I will move from that into a time of turning my palms up to receive what I need to receive. And then turning my palms down to relinquish and give up and put in God's hands what I need to put into God's hands. If it's some, people who are going through difficult times or anything, I will do that, and it's a way of kind of leading into prayer. But that's just a brief thing. Ann Wilson Schaaf wrote this book back in the 80s. So if there's anything that you think she wrote to address today's situation, it was, this was 25 years ago, so she was not talking about anything particular today. So I just want you to be aware of that. But if you've dealt with addiction or lived around somebody who is dealing with addiction, you know that things can kind of get crazy, and that people, her first book was on codependence and about how people are kind of play into that whole addiction thing. But this was really looking at the whole system that we're in, looking at so much of our political economic system as being kind of like some of the craziness of dealing with an addict, and about how we either choose to buy into that craziness or not. And so she defines an addictive system. She says, in an addictive system, confusion is the norm. Much time and energy are spent simply trying to figure out what's going on. When we're confused, we tend to believe that the world is confused. When we live in the midst of confusion, we forget what non-confusion feels like or looks like. And she says that confusion keeps us powerless and controllable, keeps us ignorant, keeps us from taking responsibility for our own lives because we're blaming something out there, and keeps us busy. She says one of the best ways to break the pattern of confused thinking is to stop and wait. People who meditate know the value of stopping and waiting. By sitting quietly and shutting off their left brain thinking processes, they allow understanding to come to them. And she talks about dealing with dishonesties, which, we see a lot. I mean, we just talked about, and even if you get your news from a reliable source, they are trying to sensationalize things to make you pay attention to them. And so that's one of the things we deal with. She said dealing with even small-scale dishonesties is exhausting. Everyone involved must expend enormous amounts of energy simply clarifying interactions. Communication becomes a web of lies. Dishonesty is subtle and universal in our culture. And then she says, okay, abnormal thinking processes are especially evident in politics. Confusion is the norm in political rhetoric. Innuendos, assumptions, vague statements, planned misinformation, and suggestions are the stuff of the political world. And I mean, you can look at, the number of dishonest things that are going on, but I mean, just look at the Democratic candidates, and there's a lot of this stuff going on in the primaries with them as well. You can't blame one particular group for this. It seems to be all this innuendo and stuff. In his book, The Screwtape Letters, who's familiar with the Screwtape Letters? C.S. Lewis wrote this wonderful book about, he imagined a senior demon writing to a younger demon who's been given the responsibility of pulling aside from the right path this young man. And so Screwtape writes these letters to Wormwood, the young novice devil. And so this is one of the quotes from that. Be sure that the patient remains completely fixated on politics. Arguments, political gossip, and obsessing on the faults of people they have never met serves as an excellent distraction from advancing in personal virtue, character, and the things that the patient can control. Make sure to keep the patient in a constant state of angst, frustration, and general disdain toward the rest of the human race in order to avoid any kind of charity or inner peace from further developing. Ensure that the patient continues to believe that the problem is out there in the broken system rather than recognizing there is a problem with himself. Keep up the good work. Uncle Scrooge. So, sometimes that fixation on politics can really get us not where we need to be. This prayer is one that's used in all 12 step groups. It originated with Reinhold Niebuhr, and I've got it on the back side of the little survey sheet that you took, but there's also a longer version of this that I put the extra part on here too. And this prayer has become important to me because it helps me to separate things out. God give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. What are some things that I cannot change or you cannot change? The weather, yes. Good. How about other people? I mean, I have, David, I've tried. But, no, I'm teasing. But, we can't change other people. And we certainly can't change people in Washington or we can't change that. Which means that we have to accept the things that we cannot change. And so, what can we change or what can we do to contribute to making a change? And so I came across this, which I thought was great. It's a little flow chart about serenity. And it starts at the top. You see there's a problem. And then you ask yourself, can I change it? And if it goes off to the left, well, maybe I can. So I ask for wisdom. And then it goes back to, can I change it? And if the answer is no, I ask for serenity and accept it. If I can change it, then yes, I ask for courage to change it. So sometimes when I'm struggling with something and I don't know what is my part in this, what can I do, what can I change? And sometimes the only thing I can change is my attitude toward it. And whether it eats me up inside or whether I'm able to go on with serenity. There are a number of interesting books I've come across. This is one that I think it just came out, and I was able to jump on it and when it was posted on the library. But this is looking at a Japanese concept called Ichigo Ichai. And it's one of those things that doesn't really translate into English very well, but it is literally would be once a meeting or in this moment an opportunity. And it basically means that every moment deserves our full attention. That nothing will ever happen again in the same way. So be aware of that and be living in the present and be taking advantage of that. And I saw a quote that kind of sums this up. It says, speak to people in a way that if they died the next day, you'd be satisfied with the last thing you said to them. I think that that's important. So these are some of the principles that he has for that. Number one, don't postpone special moments. Two, live as if this were going to happen only once in your life. So if there's something you're doing, don't say, oh, well, we can come back tomorrow or something. That we need to dwell in the present. Do something you've never done before. apply mindfulness to your five senses and notice coincidences. Make every gathering a party. If you don't like what's there, make something different. And reinvent yourself. Be a hunter of special moments, he says, just to be aware of that. How many of you have a problem with worrying? I think everybody worries. Everybody worries, but some people are chronic worriers. David and I were just laughing. My grandmother was one of those chronic worriers, and he was reminding me that, you remember when Skylab was going to fall out of the sky? She just knew it was going to fall on her. I mean, the chances of that happening were just infinitesimal. And the chances of it even landing in a populated place were pretty small. But she lived in Atlanta, and she knew it was going to fall right on her house. And so that was kind of just one of the things that she did. And sometimes, he was talking about the difference between our feelings and our thoughts. If you go to a suspenseful movie, you feel that even though you know this is not real, I'm just watching this on the screen, but you can get scared to death. David and I went to see 1917 recently, and it's very suspenseful, and somebody must have gotten out of this alive to be able to tell the story, and this is just a movie about it, but it's just so stressful. It just gets you so involved in it, and or even if you go back and watch something you've seen before, and or you've read the book and you know what's going to happen, it still can get you all worked up. But this David Carbonell has some great ideas that some of them are kind of funny. One is to schedule worry. And he said best not right before bedtime or something, but just have, if something you keep worrying about pops up, say, wait a minute, it's not 2:30 in the afternoon. This is not my time to worry about that. He said, to kind of humor the worrisome thoughts, just kind of say, oh, yeah, I bet that's going to happen. One of the things he said is, if you've learned another language, try to worry in another language. I just thought about that. In Spanish, I studied Spanish, and you never really, it's advanced when you get to those future perfect. Había, habría. I would really be very fluent in Spanish if I could do that. Or he said even Pig Latin. So just say you're going to Italy, and you're a real worrier, and you're trying to learn some Italian. So try to, you can put it into Google Translate and see what it looks like and say it in Italian. Or just say it in an Italian language. I'm so afraid that this is going to happen. Or Italian accent. Or better yet, Italian opera. So he said, sing your worries and put them to a tune, or maybe a limerick or a poem or a haiku. I just was thinking, now, how would I do this? Say if I was going to Italy. What if I lose my passport and nobody believes that I'm American, and I get sent to a refugee camp where I languish all forgotten till I die in misery. It kind of, Italian opera is very dramatic, isn't it? So let's do it. I've got another one for you. Let's see if I can remember the tune. What if while I'm in Naples, Vesuvius erupts, and I am buried in ashes? turns to glass. If you've been keeping up with the news, you know that I just found somebody who's. Anyway, I have a friend who calls me and just worries all the time, you know, when she talks to, you know, it's always something she's worried about. And she's actually a singer, but I've never heard her sing, and I'm just going to start saying, okay, I'll only accept you telling me about worries if you sing them to me. and I'll tell you something about singing. It uses a different part of the brain. You know people who have dementia, who have lost the ability to talk, but they can sing. And I think I have this theory that it might sort of get those things out of the part of the brain where they're stuck and help them get somewhere else, and maybe you can kind of get unstuck from some worries. So anyway, just try it. Worth a try. I've just been going around finding memes, so y'all excuse me, but anything that costs you your peace is too expensive. Isn't that the truth? There's a lot about worry. I mean, Jesus had a lot in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And Max Lucado said, the key is this: meet today's problems with today's strength. Don't start tackling tomorrow's problems until tomorrow. You do not have tomorrow's strength yet. You simply have enough for today. One of the people whose writings I enjoy reading is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And if you know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, he was a theologian minister who actually went back to Germany before World War II because he felt like he needed to be there with his people, and ended up being imprisoned when he was participating in a plot to kill Hitler, actually. And but this is one of the things that he said. I've got the full quote on the back of your sheet there. I just took this out of it. I believe that in every moment of distress, God will give us as much strength to resist as we need, but it is not given to us in advance lest we rely on ourselves and not on God alone. In such faith, all fear of the future should be overcome. And he ended up dying right before his camp was liberated. I'm actually not going to show this because I have to go out and come back in. But that was a little thing from Oprah. You can watch it on YouTube if you want to. But these are four of the gurus of some of our self-help movement now that she put on a YouTube video from her Sunday show. Oprah did for just talking about dealing with anxiety and worry. And the next thing is self-care, types of self-care. And this kind of breaks it down into four different areas: physical, sleep, stretching, walking, physical release, healthy food, yoga, and rest; emotional, stress management; emotional maturity, forgiveness, compassion, and kindness; social, boundaries, support systems, positive social media, communication, time together, and asking for help; spiritual, time alone, meditation, yoga, connection, nature, journaling, and sacred space. And I just want to say, just open it up and just tell me something that you do to help you care for yourself, to find serenity.
All of them. We need artwork.
Art, yeah. Mary is an artist. Music, is really important. I think. Gardening, yes.
Nature.
Mm-hmm. And we live in such a beautiful place. Aren't we blessed to just have such beautiful nature all around us? So there are just all these things that we can do to really feed our souls. And just moving and being involved. And one of the things is having a sense of humor. Being able to laugh. I always listen to the podcast of Wait, Don't Tell Me. I just think that is a hoot. You know, they are silly and everything, but it's just funny. You know, and I always try to find something to laugh at every day. I just finished a great book that made me laugh called Dad is Fat by Jim Gaffigan. Has anybody read that book? It is the funniest book, and it's good, clean humor. You know, some of these comedians just, you kind of go, oh, stop it. But it's just so funny, and I was just laughing through that. Or funny movies or funny books. A person without a sense of humor is like a wagon without springs. It's jolted by every pebble on the road. You know, a well-developed sense of humor is the pole that adds balance to your steps as you walk the tightrope of life. And then Hugh Sadi describes it as a sense of as needed armor. You know, it says some laughter on one's lip, joy in one's heart, and some laughter on one's lips is a sign that the person down deep has a pretty good grasp of life. And gratitude. Gratitude is so important. Just, you know, being thankful for what you have and having what they call an attitude of gratitude. Now, I don't know if this next thing is true exactly, but it says you can rewire your brain to be happy by simply recalling 3 things you're grateful for every day for 21 days. So, you know, keep a gratitude journal or some form of just being.
I was when she still lived here, but text my kids every day to tell me 3 things they're thankful for. Have a reminder on my phone. So we did that for a long time.
That's a great way. Yeah, but gratitude is just so important, and it's just hard to be complaining when you're being grateful. Mary, what were you going to say?
One of the things that I was struck with the most when I was visiting Bali many years ago was that the people there would burn some incense, like 5, 6, 7, 8, however many times a day. They wanted to, and it was to express gratitude. So, I mean, you would always see all these people around you, you know, giving thanks, and it was just so powerful.
So it's like a ritualized way of doing it. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I love this quote. It says, if you choose not to find joy in the snow, you will have less joy in your life, but still the same amount of snow. How true. And also, the less you respond to negative people, the more peaceful your life will become. This next one is something. If you try to engage me in an argument and I refuse to argue and instead walk away, it does not mean that you have won the argument. It just means that my serenity is more important than trying to convince you that I am right. And sometimes, David helped me remember that. I found this and I thought this was a good illustration, just stepping away sometimes. If someone gets mad at you for creating a boundary, consider that a good sign that the boundary was necessary. If right now you're struggling with organized religion, know this, so did Jesus. A lot of us who are Christians are upset that, you know, by the press our faith is getting by some people that we don't think are practicing it very well. So.
Virginia, I have a son who grew up in a household with 2 parents that were pastors. And one son is very involved with the church, and the other, you know, goes to weddings and funerals, that kind of thing. We were having a discussion one day, and I tried to be open to him, and he said, Mom, I just have problems with organized religion. And I looked at him and said, you ought to try working in it. If he has problems, he ought to.
It's like you see how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
So, no, and that's not just I know it's kind of, it's so true. I saw this little cartoon that, you know, it's like, hey, bud, I just wanted you to let you know I'm on fire and probably dying. Like, you know, you feel like the weight of the earth is telling you this. Now would be a really good time to just give up. And then Cool, quick question. Are you still covered with kittens, puppies, sloths, laughing babies, monkeys, trees, and other awesome things? And he said, well, sure am. Well, then I'm going to keep fighting for you. So, one of the things, I go to Lee Arundel State Prison every week and just help out however it needs to be. And I learn so much from these women who can control so little in their lives. I mean, they have so little control, and they never know when somebody's going to say, grab your stuff, you're moving to a new dorm, or you're going to a different prison, or, they have no control over these things. And so I have learned so much from them, and those who live out a life of trying to help others and trying to be a good person in the middle of all that is really, I can learn so much from them because I have so many choices. And every day, every Monday when I walk out of there and realize, hey, I'm a free person and I can choose so many things. But anyway, this is a good thing. You've heard the story of the starfish, the little boy who's walking on the beach, and there were all these starfish that were stranded on the beach, and he was throwing them back into the sea, and somebody said, you'll never be able to get all those back in. That won't matter. He said, what mattered to that one?
Yeah.
So helping one person might not change the whole world, but it can change the world for one person. So sometimes that's what we're called to do, is just help that one person. And gaining perspective. Sometimes you have to step back a little bit. Perspective is the way we see things when we look from a certain distance, and it allows us to appreciate their full value. Dr. Wayne Dyer said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And this is another thing to remember. Most of your stress comes from the way you respond, not the way life is. Adjust your attitude and all that extra stress is gone. Oh, okay. Sorry. Capture.
You can do it now.
Barbara Brown Taylor, who is an Episcopal priest who lives in North Georgia, wrote a book called Learn to Walk in the Dark, and I like this quote. She says, if I can summon the energy to put on my bathrobe and go outside, the night sky will heal me. Not by reassuring me that I will be just fine, but by reminding me of my place in the universe. Looking up at the same stars that human beings have been looking at for millennia, I find my place near the end of the long, long line of stargazers who stood here before me. And this is when I was feeling upset about things, I was last year using a devotional with readings from Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk. And this one really struck me. He was very concerned about the arms buildup and everything. If I were more fully attentive to the Word of God, I would be much less troubled and disturbed by events of our time. Not that I would be indifferent or passive, but I could gain strength of union with the deepest currents of history, the sacred currents which run opposite to those on the surface a great deal of the time. And just to, as I meditate, just to kind of thinking about those sacred currents that are going under all of this. And this is actually, this whole presentation is just an excuse to show you pictures of my grandchildren. We are concerned about the future for our children, for our grandchildren. I will only go so far into that future. And these are the ones who are going to carry it forward. And, I've been put here for this time, and they've been put there for that time. And I can't control what goes on in their time. I can't do that. And I was at, I took one of my grandsons, Julian, to the cemetery where my grandparents and my parents are buried. And I thought about this. On the left is the marker for my grandparents who were born in the 19th century. my parents were born in the 1920s. And Julian, in the middle, my grandson, has a real good chance of making it into the 22nd century. Think about that, just that picture spanning the 19th century to the 22nd century. And he's, we're sending them ahead to a time we don't know what it's going to be, but we have to trust that what will be there. The book of Esther in the Bible, if you know the story there, she was became a queen. Really, was in the king's harem when the Jews were sent to Persia, and she had an opportunity to save her people, which would have risked her life in order to do that. And her uncle told her, you've been called for such a time as this. And you know what? That goes for all of us. We've been called for this time. And this is our time. And if we're all so caught up in the minutia and all the anxiety of the day, we're not going to be able to fulfill our mission in this world at this time. So we have to find that stillness, that serenity, and learn how to choose the way we react and learn how to find that focus that we need. I found this, and I hope it doesn't overwhelm you, but it's kind of a blessing. May God bless you with discomfort so that you may live deep within your heart. With your discomfort, at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done to bring justice and kindness to all our children and the poor. And my final one was this one I thought was good. Some days are better, some days are worse. Look for the blessing instead of the curse. Be positive, stay strong, and get enough rest. You can't do it all, but you can do your best.
That's cute.
So, thank you, and I hope you
We have refreshments in the back. I hope you'll stay and mingle and meet all the cool people that are here